stuff, but Brooklyn wins in 5. Book it.
Basketball Society.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Atlantic Files, the number one podcast on the number one division in the NBA, brought to you by BasketballSocietyOnline.com and the Underdog Sports Podcast Network, joined by your host, myself, Alex Fishbein. So, we are entering playoff season. The play-in game's still going on right now. At the time I'm recording this, we still have yet to see Indiana versus Washington and Memphis versus Golden State. But those are deciding the last 2 seeds on each conference respectively. And the rest of the playoffs are all set up and ready to start this coming weekend. The final standings of the Atlantic Division this season. We have the Sixers in first at 49-23. We have the Nets in second at 48-24. The Knicks in third at 41-31. The Celtics in fourth at 36-36. And we have the Raptors bringing up the rear. I actually don't know what their record is because I didn't have it up here because I was just looking at the playoff bracket and they're obviously not in the playoffs. So the Raptors record is 27-45. Hopefully the Raptors end up getting themselves a decent lottery pick. Hopefully the ping pong balls roll their way and they end up getting somebody that they can add to this team that could really make it very, very dynamic. So, without further ado, let's jump into some playoff predictions. We're actually going to save the Sixers game for last since we don't exactly know who they're going to play just yet. So, as we watched, we saw the Celtics beat Washington pretty easily. We saw that Jason Tatum went off for 50 points. We saw Kemba Walker have himself a decent game. The only alarming thing of that game, I would say, is Robert Williams going down yet again, aggravating that toe injury that he previously had. And now we don't know what kind of availability he's going to have come this series with Brooklyn. So it's the 2 versus 7. Obviously, Brooklyn has the home court. Brooklyn has their big 3 pretty much back. But honestly, I feel as though if they wanted to, they could get one of those big 3, still get them some rest in this series because, you know, Boston, they lost Jaylen Brown for the rest of the season. They don't really have any kind of true centers on this roster, or any good centers, I should say. The perimeter defense has been decent. They've been about middle of the pack in defense in total. And it's just good. It should be a walkthrough series for Brooklyn. Now, obviously, Boston's not just going to let them walk all over them. They're going to come in, play hard, and give everything that they got. Brad Stevens is going to try to come up with some creative rotations and creative ways to play defense against this Brooklyn team. And we all know that Brooklyn's defense isn't good. So there are still a couple little things that Boston could exploit, maybe for a win, maybe very slightly, maybe 2 wins, but there's still some little things that they could exploit. So, all in all, I mean, I really don't see Brooklyn losing this first round matchup. Even if they only have 2 of their big 3, they're going to be pretty unstoppable against Boston. But it looks like they should have all 3. I mean, the three of them, Harden's averaging 24.6, and then Kyrie and Kevin Durant are both averaging 26.9 points per game. With just those three, that's over 60 points a game in production, which is absurd. And the big thing, I think, for the Nets is having Harden healthy, because the team just looks like it unlocks an entire another level when you have Harden playing, as compared to, I mean, don't get me wrong, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving together with this team is still a very, very, very good team. But it doesn't seem like they reach that, like, crazy, ridiculous, unstoppable team unless Harden is there, healthy, playing well. So him being back, I think, is huge for them. All in all, I think this honestly is a sweep. So I see Brooklyn taking all four right in a row and really not being all that difficult. I'm sorry, Celtics fans. It was a very tumultuous season for you guys. A lot of injuries, everything. You've been to 3 of the last 4 Eastern Conference Finals, even though you haven't gotten past that. This season was just a tough one. I think this season in general was just tough for every team because, I mean, we saw a number of really severe and major injuries to star players. We saw a number of injuries in general, across the league. And it was tough that they brought in this play-in tournament on a season like this. If the play-in tournament was brought in on a different season, even last year with the bubble season and everything, I feel as though the play-in tournament would be a lot better recepted, I don't think that's a word, but a lot better received, I should say. And it's just tough when you have such a jam-packed, schedule with tons of back-to-backs, tons of, traveling for weeks at a time and everything. And on top of that, just it being COVID and everything in general with all the injuries and all that, it's just been rough. And then to have to play another game or possibly 2 at the very end to then get into the postseason, it's just altogether, pretty difficult for the players, for everyone's bodies, for everyone's health, everything. So it's a little tough this season, but I do hope they keep this, because if any of you watched the Warriors versus Lakers play-in game, that was an amazing game all the way through from start to finish. The Celtics-Washington game might have been a bit of a blowout. The Pacers game was a bit of a blowout. Even the Memphis-Spurs game, it looked like it was going to be a huge blowout. The Spurs came back, made it a bit of a game, and still was pretty entertaining down to the end. And it also, to me, gives a lot more importance to the regular season, because if you're a team that really wants to be healthy come playoff time, your team's going to be pushing that much harder to be in the top 6 seeds so that you can avoid these last 2 games. Also, on top of that, you just don't want to leave those last 2 games up to, some kind of luck or some kind of, you happen to be off that night and then the next night that team is just blazing, or they get their superstar back for that game, whatever it may be. There's a lot of factors that could happen there. So it really makes teams really push hard for that top 6. It also gives those bottom teams that, might be on the brink or whatever, it might give them some momentum going into the next season, even if they lose. If they have just a good showing, you can see how guys step up in important situations. It overall, I think, is a good addition to the NBA season. It's just rough this season because of the shortened schedule, the jam-packed games, really trying to just fly through everything and get everything done in such a crazy manner. It just wasn't that great for this season. But either way, for the Celtics, I mean, it's a testament to them that they even got up to the 7 seed. With all the injuries that they've had, with all the people that got COVID, with all of that kind of stuff. The things about people saying Brad Stevens should be on the hot seat is just crazy to me. Again, the injuries have been insane. Everything's been insane. He definitely should not be on the hot seat. Brad Stevens is perfectly fine. He's not the issue with this team. The team wasn't even built that well for this season in general. again, no real centers, not even any real power forwards. So you're already kind of playing behind the eight ball there. But all in all, I still think that would be a successful season for Boston, given all of the circumstances. Obviously not successful if you think back to the beginning and say what their expectations were, but with everything that has happened, it still is a pretty successful season. So going to Milwaukee versus Miami, I think this should be one of the more interesting first-round series, just because we've seen Butler kind of have his way with Giannis and his Milwaukee teams. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see, especially how this Milwaukee team does now with Drew Holiday, since they made those deals and signings in the offseason prior, to see how they gel for the playoffs come playoff time. I think Milwaukee does win this. However, I think it's going to go 7 games because you just can't count out Miami, especially with what we saw them do in the bubble postseason last year. There's a lot of things that Miami still can do, and they still have a lot of quality players. And, when it's time to step up, Jimmy Butler steps up usually. So I think it's going to go 7. Now, another Atlantic team, we got the Knicks playing against Atlanta. The Knicks are finally back in the playoffs. First time in the playoffs since 2012-2013 season. Wow, that's been a long time. The Knicks, I think, are honestly built to get past this first round matchup. They usually have played well against Atlanta, given the fact that Atlanta, I don't think they were fully healthy on any of those 3 games, the Hawks. But they at least had Trae Young for one of the 3, if I'm not mistaken. And the Knicks took all 3. That's why they got this 4th seed and why they got that home court advantage, which I will tell you, Madison Square Garden is probably going to be bumping for that first playoff game and probably the rest there on out. But that will be insane with how long that all the Knicks fans have been waiting to finally see a postseason game. So that should be super entertaining. I think the Knicks are going to take this series in 6. And I just have a lot of faith in Tibbs. I have a lot of faith in Julius Randle showing up in 4 games to that they have to win. I'm not saying 4 games in a row or anything like that, but I think he will in 4 games. And I think the defensive aspect of this series, especially, the Knicks are going to suffocate a lot of the things that the Hawks like to do. So I think that will be great. The other thing I'm looking for is still the growth in RJ Barrett too, because this is RJ's first time getting into the postseason. And then, Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose back in the postseason. Gotta love that. I want to see D Rose just go off, win them a couple games. That would be amazing. And now we'll get to the Sixers. So they face either the Pacers or the Wizards. I think that they will. If it's the Pacers, I think it's a sweep. If it's the Wizards, I think it's 4-1. I'm giving them 1 just because I feel like Westbrook and Beal are bound to go off at the same time and get them some sort of close win one time, probably at Washington. I wouldn't be surprised, especially if the Sixers just have an off shooting night. I wouldn't be surprised if it went 4-1. But against the Pacers, I don't see the Sixers having that much of an issue with them, especially now that everyone's fully healthy. They had a week break and everything. I think that, they'll be able to handle those guys pretty easily, especially the fact that Karis LeVert will still be out for probably the first 2 games, maybe 3. So I think that the Sixers will probably take care of them pretty easily. I think Washington does win this play-in game to then face the Sixers because Washington has played very well against Indiana. I remember looking at the averages for Westbrook against Indiana this year in 3 games. He was averaging a triple-double, but well over a triple-double. It was 20 points, 18 rebounds, and 15 assists or something insane like that. So with the Sixers, I have very high hopes, but I don't have a lot of faith. I do think they win this first round series pretty easily. Then they go on to play the Knicks in the second round, and I think they beat the Knicks pretty easily too. I think that's a 4-1 series. Then it comes down to the bottom. I think Brooklyn beats Milwaukee. I don't think there's really much of a debate about that. Like, there's a lot of people saying Milwaukee might be built better than the Sixers to beat Brooklyn, but I don't agree with that. I think Brooklyn beats Milwaukee probably in like 6. So then it comes down to Eastern Conference Finals, Brooklyn versus the Sixers. I like the Sixers' chances just because I think that they are built very well in terms of they got their shooters and everything, and they have people around Embiid that can still put the ball in the basket. It's just a matter of their consistency. And then on top of that, the defense will at least limit some of the Nets' offense. Not saying they're ever going to stop them cold, because you can't do that with 3 superstars like that, but it will at least limit them. However, I think ultimately Brooklyn will ultimately take this series in 7. And it will definitely be heartbreaking. I'm actually interested to see if that does happen, what happens then with the Sixers roster if they try and make some drastic moves, whatever it may be. But I do think Brooklyn ends up winning that in 7, advancing to the NBA Finals. With the West, I'm going to go through this one a little bit quicker just because we're not diving that far into the West since this is the Atlantic Finals. So we have Utah facing the winner of Memphis or Golden State. I hope it's Golden State just because if it is Utah versus Memphis, I don't think that's going to be a fun series at all. I mean, Ja Morant's cool. Love watching Ja Morant play. But as a team, Memphis is pretty boring. Utah probably will wipe the floor with them. Not saying that Golden State will come in and wipe the floor with Utah or anything, but I just think Utah has a much better chance of sweeping and blowing out Memphis all 4 games than they do with Golden State. And it would just be great to see Steph Curry going off as much as he has been in that series against Utah and possibly being another 8 seed to take down a 1 seed. Utah is one of the, other than the first Milwaukee team that got their 1 seed a couple years ago, Utah's probably the next highest or the next most doubted 1 seed in my personal opinion. I don't see them progressing past the second round at the farthest. So I have many doubts about Utah, especially because in past playoffs, we've seen Gobert be game planned right off the floor, and that's who everyone is saying is their MVP, who's saying is Defensive Player of the Year, this and that, saying all these high praise things for Gobert. And we've yet to really see him be the same amount of impactful in the postseason as he is in the regular season. So, I mean, that's just me, maybe. So, I'm having Utah versus Golden State. I think Golden State will win that play-in. And I think Utah wins in 7. I'm going to give them 7. Actually, no, I'll go 6. Utah wins in 6. And then we have the Clippers versus Dallas. I think the Clippers take this. I mean, revenge is definitely on their minds. They've rested their guys plenty all this time. We all know that. They have a couple of extra pieces from last time. They don't have Montrezl Harrell this time, and they have some other guys that might be able to play a little bit more than him. And so now I think they beat Dallas in... I like Dallas, but especially if Doncic doesn't have a ridiculously crazy night, I just don't see Dallas winning that much. So I'm going to say Clippers in 5 over Dallas for that one. And then we have Denver versus Portland. I think this series will be another very interesting one, especially because Denver has lost big name people. They definitely won't have Jamal Murray. They probably won't have Barton. They probably won't have Monty Morris unless he's on like a... minute restriction. So there's a lot of pieces in there that are questionable. And then you have Michael Porter Jr., who has shown you a lot of very good flashes, but we haven't seen it when it matters the most yet because he hasn't had the chance to. So there's a lot of ifs there. Portland still has Dame and CJ. And they have some other extra pieces that they didn't have last season, like Norm Powell. I actually think Portland wins this first round matchup. I think Portland wins in 7, by the way. Then we have Phoenix versus the Lakers. This will be very interesting because obviously now with the Lakers healthy, they're looking pretty dangerous. That game against Golden State did come down to the end, but again, that was a 1-game play-in. That wasn't a 7-game series. The Golden State didn't have to beat them 4 times to get past them. Phoenix, we've yet to really see them in the postseason do much because last year, even though they went 8-0 in the bubble, they still didn't get in, and we haven't seen these young guys in the postseason at all. Chris Paul will definitely be great for them. Their defense is really good, and Devin Booker can obviously fill up the score sheet anytime he wants. This series, I think, is going to go very, very close, but I'm saying it goes 7, and I'm saying the Lakers win. So now we have Utah versus the Clippers. I think the Clippers take care of Utah probably I'm saying 6. Then I'm saying the Lakers beat Portland in 5. So we have Lakers, Clippers. And I had this the last year too. And I said the Clippers. And I always say I'm not going to bet against LeBron. And I end up betting against LeBron. And then it's never right. So in that notion, I'm going to say the Lakers win. They win in 6. They get to the finals against Brooklyn. Everyone's going crazy because LeBron might repeat all this kind of stuff, but Brooklyn wins in 5. Book it. You heard it here first. Brooklyn wins in 5. They win the finals. KD, MVP again. Actually, no, I'm saying James Harden finals MVP because Harden is the heart of that team. And like I said, they unlock that whole new level when Harden's on that team. So watch out for them. But that's it for me, guys. Thank you for listening to the playoff prediction episode. Hopefully it is a great, great, great NBA postseason. Playing games have been pretty entertaining so far. 2 of those left, and then we get into the real fun. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure you check out basketballsocietyonline.com and the Underdog Sports Podcast Network. You can find us everywhere you get your podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you leave a review, a comment, and check us out on YouTube too. We're on the Basketball Society YouTube page, so check us out on there. Leave some comments, like, subscribe, hit the bell, get the notifications. Y'all know what to do. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll catch you guys next week. Peace.